Today on Mastering Change, we're talking about neurodiversity and why ADHD in women is so often overlooked, misunderstood, or misdiagnosed. I'm joined by Samantha Hiew, founder of ADHD Girls, who shares her own journey and unpacks the gender bias still embedded in psychiatry. We explore how hormonal shifts and perimenopause impact stress and self-regulation, how trauma and neurodivergence can overlap, and why diagnosis, when done right, can be a powerful act of self-recognition. Samantha also speaks to the importance of validating individual experience and why no two neurodivergent minds are the same. Here's our conversation. Hi, Samantha Hiew. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to the Mastering Change podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. So glad to have this opportunity.
As most of our listeners know, we start all of our podcasts with a little card game. It's a card game that was invented by Esther Perel, actually. It's called Where Do We Begin? And the idea of this card game is that there is a prompt on every card that will lead you into telling a little story, a little reflection about something. And Esther believes, as we do, that stories are bridges to connection. So we hope that you'll be able to connect to us and connect to our audience with the story that you tell. Mm-hmm. So the first card I picked off the list, set off the pile even, says, when I look at a photo of my younger self, I see ...
It's interesting because I actually give talks about my journey as a girl with ADHD, just first beginning into the world. When I look at the photo of my younger self, I see a girl who was always missing the memo, who was always trying her best, but don't seem to be able to get with the program, always missing what people are telling her and getting into trouble because she didn't hear the instructions. And I would also see a child who's quite internalized, quite shut down, because a lot of what I was going through, I never knew how to express, and I was always known as a good girl, by my parents, the easiest baby. But I think the flip side of that is that I never gave people any trouble because I've learned from a really long time ago that no one comes, even if I do get upset. And so I see a girl with a lot of intense emotions that were pretty much internalized inside her. And she's almost not even present in there, and she's always just trying, to make people like her, that sort of thing.
It's quite powerful, quite emotional, isn't it, when you kind of see that as a little girl. And how have you, now you see that little girl, is there anything you do to kind of take care of her? Does she show up again in your life at the moment, or...
Yeah, I mean, I would say actually since my diagnosis of ADHD 4 years ago and recently getting my autism diagnosis has really helped me understand from an ADHD perspective, perhaps ADHD and trauma, the journey that I've gone through. And like I've kind of seen that perhaps, I have kind of started life in my immediate family environment being quite misunderstood. And I feel like, when you put a front, and you develop this persona that everyone seems to like, and they prefer that one side of that, of you. And when you stop to act like that, and you actually start to act more like you, then they can't take that. And in the past few years since my diagnosis, I've gone through a lot of changes. I built a social impact company that empowers neurodivergent women, but I also went through separation, divorce, a relationship that turned out to be quite insightful, but also quite traumatic. And being able to just finally get my own voice back and being me has been absolutely priceless. And I feel like, someone told me, like, this is very, very popular saying, like, you have to be the change that you want to see. And I think even during the toughest times of my life, I was still thinking, how can I use my experience to help other people? And I think what I was looking for was connection, connecting with people, women with parallel lives, and I did. I created a community event and found them and actually made really good friends as a result of that, who actually truly can meet me at my authentic depth. And it is also a place that I've never been very proud of, because I've had such strong, intense emotions that colored my life. And I think there's always a sense of shame associated with that. I must not let anyone see me being so intense. But the women who I've met on this journey, they understand that. It doesn't put them off. I mean, that doesn't mean that I'm always intense. But I just think that when you're misunderstood and you're not being heard, that's when all the labels start to pour in. You're too much, you're intense, you're crazy, and this is not what I want in my life, sort of thing, and I think once that comes out and people actually stay, that's when it feels like, oh, there's some healing, in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. I really relate to that as well. I think I'm also recently diagnosed with autism and ADHD or ADD, and yeah, it's very interesting. The people that like you say, you do have a mask and a persona that you kind of walk through. I have a mask and a persona that I walk through life with, and people, and it works. It really works really well. People really relate to me, to that part of me. But it's when, you know, when and who am I able to kind of drop that with, and who am I able to kind of be my real authentic self with. And sometimes I almost think I'm not even sure what my real authentic self is, because I'm so used to masking. I'm so used to being someone. To be honest, I think my real authentic self probably is someone who's actually very, very quiet and very, very, like, I'm quite like a loner. I don't like, but whereas the mask, or the kind of persona that I put out into the world is very much a gregarious, fun kind of time girl who, is the life and soul of every event, and is really social and really like over the top almost. And that's what people seem to want to connect to, and that energy that I bring. But that's also extremely tiring for me. I find that extremely draining. So my social battery, when I have to be out with people, like I just get very tired. So yeah, it's really interesting. Anyway, so I'd love you to introduce yourself to our audience, and let them know kind of who you are, what you do, what your kind of work is in this world of trauma, mental health, and well-being.
Sure. Thank you so much, Araminta, for sharing your thoughts and your feelings, because I resonated with exactly everything you said. And I'll come back to that. I am Dr. Samantha Hiew. I founded ADHD Girls, a social impact company, when I was first diagnosed with ADHD at the age of 40. And I run professional and personal development workshops and masterclasses and keynotes for neurodivergence, especially in the workplace settings. But over the years, I found that my heart has laid within the community. And because of that, I have re-architected my entire business to focus on community events and building up neurodivergent women's resources to navigate life after ADHD and ADHD diagnosis. And on the other side of that, I see myself as a bridge between the neuro-labeled and neuro not yet labeled. And the best place for me to do this work is with the healthcare system and the workplace system. At the healthcare system at the moment, I'm training mental health professionals on ADHD, ADHD in women through a science and intersectional lens. And really, tackling the subject from integrity, because so many ADHD women fly under the radar, do not get the adequate diagnosis, been mislabeled instead for decades, and also mistaken as trauma. Not that trauma is not present, but that it's trauma instead of ADHD or autism for the professionals, so the women don't get any support and they get mislabeled instead.
Um, So, so you're working with the work systems and NHS to help people. I've got a couple of questions actually from with what you do. But actually, my first question I'd like to ask is, why do you think women specifically fly under the radar so much with their autism and ADHD?
So glad you asked this question. Just because I was just actually a lot of the things that I learn actually is through my own life experience, having navigated post a diagnostic journey and obviously pre-diagnostic when I was flying under the radar for 4 decades before I was diagnosed. And fundamentally, there is gender bias in the assessment criteria. There is also a huge gender bias in the care model. In terms of like, say, okay, everyone's saying when you get diagnosed with ADHD, start the stimulant medication if that is what you want, because that's the first line of treatment, right? And then go to therapy. That is also the other way for you to help yourself heal. And then I went through all of that and I realized medication was very much focused on inducing, right? Okay, sort of retaining the dopamine and norepinephrine, that is potentially being swept up too much, in your body. But they don't tell you that actually women's nervous system is not supposed to have too much dopamine, right? We're supposed to have it in sort of a balanced level because too much dopamine downregulates oxytocin, and oxytocin is the neurotransmitter that regulates women's nervous system. And where do you get oxytocin? From bonding, from connection. But the more that we are dopamine driven, which we can be in this society, like being more kind of burned out and, using like various things like coffee, tea, or other means of substances to power us through our day, because we are expected to do so much now as women. But too much of that is going to cause us health issues and it's going to cause us hormonal challenges. So that's that. And I can't remember exactly what I was going to say for the second one because I was like, oh, really on yeah, what was your question, Nika?
So my question is, why do we fly under the radar as women with the diagnosis? And I think you said so. There's this gender bias, and it's
Oh, yes, I did. So there's a psychiatry that is gender bias in both the assessment and the treatment, and then there is therapy,
okay.
which I've learned along my journey that our resilience to stress are different, right? It especially for women during the time of the month, our resilience goes down with stress, and then when women enter life stage of perimenopause or menopause, even in the largest hormonal transitions like pregnancy and after childbirth, when your estrogen level drops, your resilience to stress isn't as high as before. And also when progesterone drops. So then when we're going through therapy, especially as neurodivergent women, we are essentially going into therapy with a higher level of stress and activating those traumatic memories do not necessarily, help us. It can actually serve to be traumatized. And because of the state of our nervous system and our biology, we aren't able to come down from the stress as as that therapy model was meant to cater for. So the therapy model was created, for people with a stable baseline of cortisol, or stress hormones. So I mean, knowing that now feels like maybe if I had known that at the beginning of my journey, when I went through trauma therapy after my separation, if I had known this, I wouldn't have gone through the trauma therapy at that time during one of the hardest transitions when I had to co-parent and look after my children on my own, because a lot of the traumatic memories that was brought up in my childhood in that time was actually in some ways tortured me when it came to me looking after my children. Um, but knowing that now, I feel like this knowledge needs to go out to other women. And
I also, I wonder, I mean, I would be interested in knowing the kind of trauma therapy that you did as well, because I've been talking about this a lot recently, and this is slightly off piece, but I think there is a lot of, especially if it's talk therapy, which I don't think is really the best for trauma anyway. You know, you are there just reliving, re-traumatizing yourself in every session, and it's not, I don't think it's necessarily the most conducive for healing, to be totally honest. So, um, yeah, and especially as you said, with that knowledge of where we are as women, kind of in our with our hormones and with our tolerance to stress, etc. I think another question that I had about being ADD and autistic and having a late diagnosis, what for you, what was the benefit of being diagnosed? Because I often wonder, like, is there any, like, obviously you can, if you have a diagnosis and you have severe ADD, you could be medicated if you so choose. People obviously are, and it helps a lot of people, but like you said, for women, obviously, if it's extremely stimulant focused, that's not necessarily the best or most supportive thing for us with ADD or ADHD. So what is the benefit of being diagnosed at at any age, but certainly at a late stage?
So I only know to say this now because I deep dive on the ADHD experience and the autistic experience too. And it is definitely better to know than to not to know, because when I was writing my book, Tip of the ADHD Iceberg, I went into the course of our neurodivergence experience and realized the genetic variants that we get from our parents that give rise to ADHD. They also give rise to all the co-occurring physical health conditions that neurodivergent women tend to have. And that can worsen during the period of hormonal transitions, that we know of, and every month, after a woman is menstruating. So these are really important fundamental knowledge that we need to know, but no one has really release that, out into the open. And there is so much about women's health that is a blur for neurodivergent women. And if we don't know how they all connect, then we're getting these mysterious symptoms, that we think an ADHD diagnosis will fix it. Stimulants, okay, fine, bring it on. But then on its own isn't enough. We need to look at how hormones are doing, how our lifestyle is going, who we're with, what they're doing with our, what they're doing to our nervous system. And it's like a holistic management tool. I feel like getting the diagnosis is really just the start, but learn how to bring all these different interconnected areas together to support yourself and personalize the management to yourself, so you were able to then show up, with that increased quality of life and thrive.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. It's like it's not many people want a diagnosis because they want medication. They think that's going to help, but I think you know it is more than that, and it gives you, I guess it gives, as you say, it's the first step. It gives you the almost the permission to then go and deep dive to explore what are those tools, what is out there, what can help you. And I hope you don't mind me noticing, but on this, since we've been on this podcast, I've noticed you've got a stress ball that you've like, and that's obviously helpful. Yeah, so and that you also touch your face, occasionally to kind of like ground yourself. And I think it's really those kind of things, I only know because I also have, ADHD or ODD, and I know that there'll be so many women out there who these are simple interventions, right? Simple interventions that help us be able to show up in a way that we want to show up, that we might not be able to show up in without. I would just have no knowledge of that. Right? It's not available unless you say, right, okay, I've got this diagnosis now. Now let's go and see what's available to support me that isn't necessarily medication.
No, absolutely. That's exactly where I stand. And I also wanted to add one thing, Araminta, is because I've been doing these community events for years, and I worked with an event partner who has like one format only, which is talk and Q&A. And recently I suggested a different format and they were having none of that. And the reason I suggested a format of a talk and nervous system regulation is because the talk model, it's not very conducive to the neurodivergent like mind and body, because we're getting all this, especially when you talk about neurodivergence or mental health and trauma, a lot of that pain gets kicked up into the air.
Yeah.
And then people are sitting there like, oh, what do I do? And then they go back their entire lives like, up into the air, and what support do they get? Like, how is their nervous system of that? I just feel like a lot of how women, are, attending these events and they're receiving all this knowledge, but their nervous system is like kind of dysregulated when they get home. And I really think that this model of both talk and co-regulation is the way forward. Like I say, like I couldn't sit still. I have to like move around
And
and touch my face. And
I mean, that's exactly it. And one of the things that we really try for in the event in Oxford, for example, I don't know if it's because I'm neurodivergent or it's because I also think, I've been to so many different events like the one you just talked about, which is essentially, great content, but just delivered, bam, 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 cognitive, all this kind of cerebral information that you're trying to process. And it's a lot. It's overwhelming. It can be fascinating, but it's a lot. And we need it's not just neurodivergent people, actually. I think everyone needs time to process what they hear. Actually, there's a speaker in Oxford who's coming, who's Leo Prunbloom, who we recorded another podcast with, actually, and he said that after you hear something like important information, if it's a lecture at a university or a presentation in Oxford or another event, we should, as humans, take 10 minutes of quiet time, reflection time, in order for our neural pathways in our brain to process that information, store it in the memory bank, and actually be able to then recall it at a later date. If we listen to something really cognitive or cerebral, and then immediately go on our phones, for example, or immediately kind of do something else that's distracting, we'll only store a tiny bit of that as memory. We won't be able to recall it in the same way as if we do, for example, let's say we did I don't know, an hour of talking, a presentation, then half an hour of grounding exercises or nervous system exercises. You'd much better remember the whatever you've just learned. And in Oxford, what we try and do is we've got a whole embodiment tent so people can go and do embodied exercises, your processing. But also I think we have multiple different spaces and venues where people have to go outside, get the fresh air, hopefully sunlight. You can't do that in London, in Oxford, but and then move our bodies, right? Be present in our bodies, because if we're just sat down listening, we will get overwhelmed, overstimulated, and also not recall, not remember, not have the same experience of what we want to have from the event. So yeah,
100%. That's amazing. That's really lovely to hear that. And yeah, I love being out in the sunshine, Knox.
yeah. And as you said, so talk to me about the community and you deciding to do the community events and the importance of that I mean, I find it fascinating because as someone with ADHD,
ADHD
well, I don't have the H, but yeah, so if I got like ADD,
label, right?
yeah, exactly, whatever, autism and ADD. I think to myself, and I don't know if it's true, like I know that I am good with people, I can be around people, and to an extent it's but it is a show. I show up and I am on show, like it's in my mask. I always think that I prefer to be alone. But you said it's this idea of connection and being able to be connected with people that has really helped you kind of transform your quality of life and etc. And I'm kind of interested in, because that's almost like the antithesis. Like I don't want to have to be around people if I can help it.
Yeah, I totally hear you, Arminta. For me, what I said was really finding the right people for me. And I'm totally like you as well. I prefer my own company. I'm a lone wolf or perhaps, it's kind of self-proclaimed lone wolf who likes to create community events, who likes to talk to people in the session and co-regulate and then, connect with women on their own afterwards. So more one-on-one afterwards. So I want to say that what you were feeling is so authentic, to like the ADHD experience. The fact that we have been masking and we have been wired to be more socially seeking. We look for the social rewards, and that we are wired to mask to fit in. But then the tiredness that we feel after we've kind of like got that social connection or we're out there, that's a nervous system that feels and see and hear and it's more sensitive to than other people. And so what you're saying is both authentic and a contradiction too, because we have a nervous system that is a mystery wrapped in an enigma to both ourselves and other people. It's very paradoxical, and it also relies so much on the dopamine, GABA, oxytocin curve, where we can very easily veer to the other side. There is such a steep window for regulation for us. And we usually get there by, being by ourselves and regulate. And then we crave to be with other people again. And then we go out there, and it doesn't take us long to be dysregulated again. Then we're like, we had to come back here. So like what you're feeling, it's actually, it's really difficult because it's like you question yourself, but then actually maybe your journey is about really just truly owning that that is you and you're okay with that. And then it is about finding the people for you, and for me, like that is definitely my experience in all areas of my relationships, friendships, romantic relationships. I've got to like reconstruct and re-explain, what I'm about after my ADHD revelation. And also explaining to my children too that sometimes when I hit, a full tank, it's going to be very, 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 very difficult for me to regulate. And it's not going to be about you. It's going to be about me just trying to get some space. Or, if I do lose my temper, then I want them to know that I still love them so much. And I always come back to explain it. Because especially when you have children sometimes, and also when you're working, being a working mother, it's a funny term, isn't it? Because you're both and more. There are so many demands in your life. It's like everyone needs a piece of you, and then you then also need you, but then you don't actually pour the energy back in here, so it's important to really validate our authentic experience.
And I'm interested in that. Another thing I experience being is sometimes is a fear. Like I think, for example, I'll just give you an example today. I'm here, in Barcelona and at the moment working, and someone said to me tonight, "Oh, we're going to go out and we're going to meet these two people I've never met before." And there's an immediate fear. Like I'm fine to go out with that one person that I know, and there's an immediate fear of, I've got to now meet two new people that I'm going to have to meet and be in a situation in a country that I don't live in anyway, or really know very well. I know, I know it quite well, but it's not my home. And then I've got to go out and be around these two people in an unusual environment for me. And it's just there's an immediate sense of fear goes into my body when I think I've got to do this. And then I know once I go there, I'll be totally fine. It will be fine. But it's just that I wonder how I can mitigate that feeling of fear, because it's just a little bit of a slight panic. Oh no, I've got to meet new people,
Yeah, I mean, that's anticipatory anxiety, right?
Yeah.
It's like you foresee and forecast what's going to happen, and that already makes it harder to actually go into the real experience. I always think about what is in it, this interaction. Is it going to be nourishing for me? Is it going to support me? It always helps to be able to, understand who they are, a little bit about who they are before you actually go and meet them. And if it's in a work setting, unfortunately for me with ADHD, it's like I need an exit plan. It's like, can I, be here for a little while and then, have an exit plan, as in like someone's waiting for me at this time, like a time slot.
Yeah.
So then you know what to expect and then you can get out.
A good piece of advice. Also, then we've mentioned obviously working with women with autism or ADHD diagnosis, and you've mentioned hormones a lot, and I think it's something that I have also experienced in my life. All like, again, very late diagnosed, but always had very difficult periods. What I thought, I remember when I was in my 20s, I went to anger management therapy because I couldn't control my anger. Then it was trauma therapy because I thought it was trauma based, and it probably part of it was trauma based, but there's all of these, and I think a lot of it's to do with hormones. And I wonder if you know much about the kind of, or I just think, I don't know if anyone knows enough about the connection between autism or neurodiversity and dysregulated hormones or different hormonal outputs for women.
Yeah, so our neurodivergent nervous system, it's especially the ADHD nervous system, is very sensitive to internal signals and external signals. So at any one time, you're dealing with what is going on with your hormones at different times of the month. And you're thinking like, when did we start tracking our our cycle? Maybe like last month or a year or 2 years ago. We never used to track our cycles. We just have our period and then we see what happens. And the PMS, when it comes to like, oh, okay, so it's a surprise, right? But then once I started learning about the hormonal cycle, that there are different seasons within the cycle and there are different purpose, different moods and personalities, that we are likely to kind of express. So there is springs, summer, autumn, and winter, and they are all good for different things. Good for different levels of productivity, good for trauma therapy, probably the follicular phase when we're in that spring going on summer where we have more kind of stress resilience. And then when we go towards autumn and winter, that's more like consolidation, putting up boundaries, rest, and actually looking after ourselves and being better at telling people no. And then for neurodivergent women, this is the normal cycle, right? With the 4 seasons. For some women, they experience premenstrual dysphoric disorder, PMDD, where they say they have maybe 1 week of feeling great and 3 weeks of feeling awful. And they have found that the reason for PMDD is due to the changes that happens to the sex hormones, and where neurodivergent women tend to struggle more is when there's a sudden drop, in the sex hormones, like straight after ovulation, and then, going into luteal phase, like when, just a week before the period. So our bodies don't like changes, you know?
And it's fascinating you say that, because I mean, I've only just been starting to look into these hormones like the luteal phase, understanding what the follicular phase is, because I really have noticed that for me, the luteal phase, so a week before my period, I always get very bad headaches, and that's when my bad mood is. If I'm going to be angry at any point, it's going to be then. If I'm going to feel low or depressed, it's going to be then. And saying that, though, a year ago, I went on to the Marina coil, which is progesterone, and that has, although I still am able to very easily map out when I'm in the luteal phase or in the follicular phase, because I still feel, a little bit something, like I still feel, like for example, 2 weeks ago on Monday, I woke up in the most terrible mood, and I just knew. I woke up and I said, right, I must be a week before my period. I know this because I know this feeling really well now, and this is the luteal phase, and it's going to be a week, and exactly a week later, I came on my period. So I'm quite good at noticing that sort of thing now. But the progesterone, rather, I'm able to notice it and I'm able to cope with it, because I truly believe the progesterone has made a huge difference in not being extreme, not having an extreme feeling of mood, so no extreme anger or anything anymore.
Mhm.
And I don't know if that's a common thing either.
Yeah, are you also on estrogen at all?
No, no,
Okay.
just
So
progesterone.
so just progesterone. Do you feel when your estrogen kicks in?
No, what would that feel like?
Oh, I mean, back when I used to be able to feel it, because now I'm on like a tip-top HRT regimen where my levels are no like just leveled, which is actually great. But back when I was like, oh, and then all of a sudden, oh, I'm fine. I'm fine. It actually just feel like something's just powering your brain all of a sudden. And for me, it was very, very obvious.
With
It's
estrogen makes you feel like you're alive and your brain's like sharp.
yeah, it's like the Beyonce hormone, where you go out there and you're like, yeah,
Mm.
I can do
I
everything.
think I have that all the time. I think I'm all right for estrogen. I'm not. It's a progesterone. Honestly, I think
That
having the progesterone in me. I mean, maybe not. Maybe I go and get some estrogen now too. Who knows? It might help me even more. But yeah, the progesterone's made a massive difference.
brilliant. Yeah. So the progesterone we tend to lose as we get older. And so they were saying actually it really depends on each individual because some neurodivergent women don't get on with progesterone, but because Mirena coil is inserted into the womb and it's like a low release and it bypasses the liver metabolism of it. And that's when it usually, if you take oral progesterone, that's when some neurodivergent women can feel dysregulated by it because with ADHD we have GABA is in a strange place and
Yeah, if
that
I've ever
affects GABA. Yeah.
I've taken GABA before. Oh my God, I've never been more dysregulated in my life. Like I took it in orally before I went to bed, and I literally for 3 days I was like, it was awful. It was awful. The worst thing I think I've ever done. Actually, I
Yeah.
did it without going. I did it just because I thought, oh, this is going to help. I don't know, anxiety or something, and I was like, no,
Yeah.
terrible.
No, like Araminta, like you were talking about the hormones, right? And how you used to feel before you had the coil. And the thing is, I looked into the new science, the brain science of ADHD, and the challenge with us not having that hormonal regulation and help each month is that so many of us can go into a ruminative, state where our default mode network will run, over time. And I remember when I was going through the medication withdrawal, when I had lower dopamine anyway, and I wasn't on HRT, I was just struggling so much every month. It's like, and I did this live experience research where women were saying they have existential crisis in that luteal phase. And then as soon as they get out of it, they're like, I'm fine. And that's what I had every month. And it's just really painful because there's a challenge in, having enough to toggle the switch between the prefrontal cortex and the default mode network, which meant that when we didn't have enough of the neurotransmitters and the hormones, then the default mode network took center stage. That was when things were more painful. But then when I got everything kind of level now, it feels like I can tap into my frontal lobe more. I can ruminate less. And I don't think so much about, all the past issues with relationships and all these things I used to ruminate and self-blame and stuff. So it's
And did you go on HRT for the menopause or for these symptoms of hormonal dysregulation and ADHD?
it was um it was very, very clear for me. I had hormonal like
Yeah.
fluctuations and I was I mean early this year 43 before I started the HRT. I'm 44 now and it really began in my early 40s.
But you're not on the, it's not the, it wasn't menopause driven, then that's what I'm sort of asking.
Perimenopause
Yeah.
driven. So I'm pretty sure I had fluctuations from late 30s. But yeah, it's definitely hormones driven. But I also know enough about estrogen metabolism. So it was
Yeah.
as simple as putting estrogen for me. It was knowing what was going on in my estrogen metabolism process. Because anything that you put into your system, you also need to get rid of.
Yeah.
It's the same with both estrogen, dopamine. And that's why we need to know this when we take all this medication and HRT. So when we add estrogen to the system, if your system doesn't break down estrogen enough, you can have too much of it and you can have estrogen dominance. So
Mm.
like I had a gene variant that has trouble breaking down dopamine and estrogen, which meant that I can only take very low doses. And the advice for women like me is to start low and go slow.
Yeah. And how did you get this all tested with the clinics?
Yeah. So because I have a genetics background, so I knew how to like
Yeah.
look at all this.
I think it's really fascinating, and it's really important for any women like listening to this and thinking or resonating with anything that we're saying. Is like there are, clinics where you can get tested for your, hormones and people that can really help, because I think it is really important and it will make a big difference.
Mhm.
Yeah. Anyway, we're coming to the end of the podcast. I will need to ask you the question that we ask all of our podcast
Right.
guests, Samantha. So the question is, we are living in a world of heightened anxiety, fear, doubt, insecurity. I mean, with conflict, political distress, or, you know, things on a big scale, and then also even with it's still the same distress and stress and anxiety when we come onto a smaller level, where we're looking at our communities and our family, with relationships with our families and our friends and our children, and then with our relationships with ourselves, honestly. If you had a button or a button you could press or a lever you could pull to change that fear, anxiety, and stress, what would it be?
Wow, that is a huge amount of problems to solve.
With one button.
Yeah,
Button,
with one button. I would go into people's body and kind of push away all the stuck points in their body that's causing them to feel trapped in themselves. Because one of the challenges I've had, and I've noticed it more, now I see it, I can't unsee it, is that so many of us who, go through different transitions and, things in our lives and we get mental health challenges, it's like we're in a mental prison. And that mental prison is born from not actually following your emotional truth and not living, in the way that definitely feels authentic to you and operating from a place that is false. So if I had a magic button, I would go into people's body and then break all that stuck points and then kind of work with all the little nuts and bolts in there to kind of build people up from the bottom up.
Systematically. Amazing. Well, that was a lovely answer. And this has been such an interesting, fascinating conversation. Honestly, I could have spoken to you all day. So thank you so much for your time. It's really, really great.
Thank you so much, Araminta. It's really great to hear from you. And yeah, I hope to see you in Oxford.